First bill will be House Bill 829, Delegate Ruth, and I see that she is here, followed by House Bill 1195, Delegate Wu, and House Bill 1201, Delegate Solomon. The first two bills are have been jointly assigned by to us and ECM, and Delegate Solomon's bill has been jointly assigned to us and Appropriations. Now, after the Delegate Solomon bill, that'll be followed by House Bill 1223, Delegate Embry, then House Bill 821, Montgomery County Delegation, being presented by Pam Queen, followed by House Bill 887, St. Mary's County Delegation, being presented by our very own Delegate Morgan. Then House Bill 1037, Charles County Delegation, being presented by our very own Deborah Davis. House Bill 1039, Delegate Dana Jones. House Bill 1073, Delegate Tavares. House Bill 1076, Delegate Wells. After that, House Bill 1121, Delegate Bridges. Finally, last bill of the afternoon will be House Bill 1220, Delegate Conaway. Yes, that would be the last bill. And so, Delegate Ruth, you have the floor for 4 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth, presenting House Bill 829, and that's not it. That's not mine. That's okay. If you can't get it, don't worry about it. So we've all seen these new gas stations continue to proliferate, even though we're trying to move away from fossil fuels. And often they're built right next to, you see these giant gas stations built right next to existing gas stations. And there's a lot of concerns about that, including business concerns, but the one I'm talking about today is the health impact. Gas stations releases various compounds that are known to have health impacts. The one that's a particular concern is benzene, which has been linked to cancer diagnosis, classified by the EPA and others as a known human carcinogen. We've done a lot of work in reducing the impact of benzene. Underground storage tanks are much more protected. We have vapor recovery systems. So there's a lot that we're doing in order to try to reduce these toxic chemicals being released into the air. However, I'm working with a scientist, Dr. Marcus Hilpert, who's probably the world's leading expert on this, and he's done a lot of research. Unfortunately, he was unable to be here today, but his research has really shown that in spite of all these different systems, there's still benzene leaking out in various places. It can seep into the concrete. He's actually done specific work on that. From the concrete, it can evaporate. There's leaks, sometimes the onboard, he's done research on the onboard recovery systems. Those can leak as well. So benzene is still getting out into the environment. And there you go. There's my slide. Thank you so much. And so this shows the cancer risk. Up on the left-hand side of the chart is the cancer risk per million. So the dotted line is a risk of 5 per million. The curved lines are what he has estimated, and this is unpublished research. He wanted me to make sure to emphasize that this is unpublished research. Those are lines that show the decreasing cancer risk with distance. So the bottom line, the pinkish one, is in California, where they have much stronger emissions controls than we do. The cyan line is in Maryland. So where the cyan line
does cyan mean bluish?
Bluish. I'm sorry. The bluish line where it impacts the dotted line is where 5 per million cancer risk would be in Maryland. And the purple line is for double the emissions where the cancer risk would be. So, for example, when you have 2 gas stations next to each other. And so you can see that the cancer risk there is, he's estimating around 300 feet. It would be 5 per million when there's double the risk. So this bill is very simple. It just requires new gas stations to be set back a distance. And I said 1,000 feet, but that was, I didn't have the benefit of this research when I put that in. I'm glad to amend that to a different number that would be more appropriate with the research, just to make sure that we're not having cumulative impact from these gas stations. Whether, new gas stations are coming in next to each other and essentially doubling the cancer risk in the surrounding communities. And so with that, I would ask for a favorable report.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor? Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Delegate, for bringing this bill. Just a clarifying question, maybe. When you're talking about construction of a new gas station, because I know a lot of gas stations end up moving into old gas stations, and they, sometimes they've torn up the, whatever tanks are underneath. And so I guess my question is, what constitutes new construction of a new station in this case?
The bill is silent on that, and that's actually a very good question, Delegate. I appreciate the question, and I hadn't had time to think that through, but I would think if it's a new station that's occupying an existing one where there's already, built, then that would be okay. If it's actually constructing the underground storage tanks and that, the equipment that's needed, that would be considered a new station. And it does grandfather in because these stations, I understand, can take maybe even 10 years to build from the time that the land is purchased, and just to get through all the approvals. That's what I've been told. So it does grandfather in stations, and I don't remember the exact date, but for which there's a signed contract before. I apologize, I don't remember what date we ended, but so it does grandfather in stations which already have a signed contract and are going through the approval process.
Okay, thank you.
There appear to be no further questions. Thank you very much, Delegate. Let's proceed to the opponents, Sarah Price and Ellen Valentino. I see Ellen. Oh, and I see Sarah also. Okay. Two minutes each. Who would like to go first? Ellen.
No, I will. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Ellen Valentino, and I'm here representing the Mid-Atlantic Petroleum Distributors. So those are the owners of convenience stores and service stations. And we are in opposition to this bill. One point, and I guess the primary point, is that when there goes to be a reconstruction or a new build, it is an extremely local process. And we just do not think that this bill should be a statewide benchmark or a ceiling for when and if a community chooses to either allow for a reconstruction or a new build of a service station. And I only stress that because service stations aren't just service stations anymore. And I say this always, they're beacons in the night. They really are, particularly in many communities. And this setback may be a good idea for one county, and they can make that determination, but it just might not make sense in another community based on that geographic outline. So it's just a simple what? These decisions and zoning decisions should be done locally, and I would think that it would be not the best policy to set a high zoning mark for every community, particularly on this changing market of what we're defining as a convenience store service station. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. My name is Sarah Price, here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association in respectful opposition to this proposal. We believe that it would negatively impact development in Maryland and inappropriately restrict competition between businesses. I think something that we all need to acknowledge is that retail service stations are a necessary aspect of our transportation infrastructure in the state. Whether we are moving away from fossil fuels, trying to encourage more EVs, people need places to get the power to their cars so that they can get to the places where they need to go. And as we see continued expansion in communities like Columbia and along the I-270 and I-70 corridors, we need to make sure that businesses are able to keep up with consumer demands. Frederick has long been a sort of bedroom community for DC, and we're seeing more and more people moving out west, moving away from the city centers as telework has proliferated throughout the state and the country. But we don't know if teleworking is going to continue. People may need to go back to the office. They're going to have to get to the places where they need to go. The implication in the proposal is that in addition to health concerns, there are also more gas stations than are necessary. But a business is not going to open a location in an area where they think they're not needed, particularly something as investment heavy as a gas station. So requiring that new locations would need to maintain a setback distance of over 3 football fields. We believe it would restrict construction and provide a policy route of protection for existing businesses, thereby removing even playing fields for businesses to compete based on their prices and quality of service. So for that reason, we would urge an unfavorable. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Delegate Terrazza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 2 things, actually 1 thing. In terms of the locals controlling this through zoning, isn't it correct that most jurisdictions have Euclidean zoning that would allow, so basically you might have a whole area that is zoned in a way that gas stations are allowed in the whole area?
I don't want to talk in an absolute.
Right.
Generally, that was the case. But now, more often than not, service stations, particularly ones that have a larger footprint, are required unconditional use and have to go through a separate process in and of itself on that. I have seen that in Howard County. I've seen that right now, to be honest with you, today as we speak, there's a bill pending before Prince George's County Council that does something extremely similar to this. So no, it's not a blanket anymore. Things have changed, and these rules around these type of facilities have become very individualized county by county.
So, but conditional uses aren't based on need. In my experience on the county council and in the zoning board, we never had the ability to just say, gosh, there's already another gas station, so we can't have another gas station.
I think, but I'm not very specific to your, not to get into a debate. There are large public hearings when it comes to the location of these facilities.
Right.
And there are rules and benchmarks. And in particular, I'm thinking in terms of the Howard County. There were changes to rules during processes. So it remains a very extreme local process. And it is not if you want a site, they can't reject you, because I can show you time and time where these locations have been rejected because of public comment or zoning nuance change by the deliberating body.
But not because another one exists.
I think Prince George's County has discussed, if not passed language that would
okay,
allow
so
I don't know.
Prince George's
I don't
County
know.
is-
But need is a critical factor in deliberation, I think, in the zoning process in many of the locales. I'm not challenging you. I
Okay,
just
no, I hear you.
know that
Okay.
need is a benchmark that is a hurdle, become more and more of a hurdle that needs to go over as these stations are developed or redeveloped.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to see you, Ellen.
It's great to see you.
You mentioned a Prince George's County bill. I'm not familiar with that. Is that relating specifically to gas stations?
It is.
Okay, great. And I'm just curious what MAPTA's position on that one is.
Right now, we are reviewing it. I'm here today. I couldn't teleport, although sometimes I wish I could. But I suspect that we'll be submitting comments on that proposal, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just curious if you could reiterate what you said. I didn't catch all of what you said about it being a statewide bill. What is the concern? I hear you delving into individual counties such as Prince George's and zoning and land use issues, but what is your concern about it being statewide?
I'm gonna repeat your question. As the older I get, the less I can hear too. You wanted to know, you want me to re-specify my position and concern over statewide? Because I think these decisions should be local. I think it depends on the need of the community or the geographic dynamic of the community. Again, we have seen, I think, service stations change from what I remember as an individual to what potentially has become a center of a community. I do think that these decisions need to be determined at the local level, how and if they want to expand their commercial corridor to include something which I believe is a benefit to the community. Thank you.
Follow up. Did you mean just in terms, strictly in terms of it being a siting decision, or are you talking about additional considerations, conditions? And I will just say as an aside, having served for 8 years on the Prince George's County Council, in my opinion, Prince George's is not a good standard to hold up, only because we do land use and zoning so differently than anywhere else in the state of Maryland. It's entirely unique.
I don't agree. I do not,
Specific to citing, when you talk about it being the need for it to be a local decision or other conditions that get attached, or
no,
both?
I think it's specific to the development of this type of business as a whole. I'm not trying to skirt the answer. The development, do you want a convenience store that sells heat oil, propane to your communities, or gasoline? And I think that decision should be at the table of the local county council or the zoning board. Or at a minimum, they should not have a barrier that would prohibit, they should not have a ceiling or a floor ceiling to look at as they make that deliberation. That's what we think. Thank you.
Delegate Boyce.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for your testimony. I'm wondering, would you feel more comfortable if the bill said it would authorize local jurisdictions to do so?
I think that would be fine, but in all fairness, I think they can do this now. I don't understand what that would add, but I am not a zoning attorney.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, there appear to be no further questions. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 829. Let's proceed to House Bill 1195. Delegate Wu is in our committee for the first time. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Oh, Ginny Thomas. Okay. All right, go ahead. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Bob, Vice Chair Stein, and the members of the Environment and the Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Cha Wu, delegate from District 9A. It is my honor and a privilege to present my first ever bill to this committee. House Bill 1195 requires some land use petitioners to disclose the ownership of the applicant. Disclosure of ownership is limited to land use petitions. Furthermore, the only petitioners who would be required to disclose ownership are those few land use petitioners who are using an entity name to hide their real motives or past practices from decision makers who need to be fully informed. Although required ownership disclosure is common in other jurisdictions, individuals in Howard County and many other Maryland jurisdictions have been successful in concealing the identity of actual owners. That's why we see so many LLCs in the campaign finance report. Constituents seek, and we believe you agree, that transparency fundamentally requires disclosure of those hidden individuals owning entities which are petitioning for land use benefits. Ethics also essentially require disclosure of the individuals owning entities seeking government benefits. On the national level, in 2021, the United States Congress passed the Corporation Transparency Act, which requires the disclosure of beneficial owners from corporations, limited liability companies, and other entities formed in the United States. HB 1195 removed this non-disclosure tool used by some entities, which profit to the disadvantage of the common good. There is no reason why entities that petition for land use tax benefit, tax incentives, exemptions, waivers, and other beneficial treatment should not disclose the ownership of the entity filing the petition. We also filed an amendment which Legislative Service published this last Friday, and to narrow the disclosure of ownership to be more specific and be more limited. Also, the amendment resolved the note that by the business law section of Maryland Bar Association that a separate section I-407 is unnecessary and redundant. That section was removed. My office sent you the amendment on Monday yesterday. We want to hold developers accountable, make our government and zoning boards transparent, and at the same time, we want to focus on the key players in this business who own more than 10% stakes of a developer entity. Ones dealing with public goods and asking for tax exemptions, tax benefits, tax incentives, waivers, and this should be no hidden secret. They need to disclose the ownership to the public. More must be done to protect the public interest. Public interests are vulnerable and valuable. Public assets can be taken advantage of. Officials could be misled by powerful, persuasive, and professional experts who withhold complete information. Fragile, scarce public assets must be better protected for a better outcome. Making the ownership structure transparent and publicly accessible will help our normal people be informed and get the government in check. For the physical impact, the bill is not expected to directly impact local and state revenues. I'm asking for a favorable report on HB 1195 as amended. So before our panelists start, I would like to welcome our two new, I shouldn't do that, right? And our Ginny Thomas, our House of Delegate from 1983 and 1994, and Ms. Liz Bobo, former Howard County Executive and House of Delegates, 1994 2015.
Yeah, I sat next to Liz when I was on this committee way back during the Jurassic era. So, so let me go through you have a number of virtual witnesses. The first is Hiryu Hadgu. I know I must have mispronounced your name. So please tell us how your name is pronounced. Welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Hiryu Hadgu on behalf of Howard County Citizens Association. We are gratified to see this important legislation taken up by your committee here, and we thank Delegates Wu, Simmons, and Vogel for introducing it. This bill is about quality of life. It's about infrastructure. It is about transparency, ethics, public trust, and increasing accountability in our local government. Zoning and land use decisions, while being the most consequential of all decisions on a daily basis that affect us, receive very little scrutiny, and it's primarily due to the influence of LLCs that play a role in campaigns, in our local campaigns. We in Howard County have witnessed firsthand the role of campaign contributions play on these decisions. In 2022 alone, hundreds of thousands of contributions were made to candidates, some of them receiving 80% or 80 to 90% of the contributions being from developers. The LLCs are established to obscure the owners and beneficiaries of land use decisions in such a way that such beneficiaries can give campaign contributions from multiple sources to the same candidates. Last year, community activists were able to identify that certain land developers were able to skirt the legal campaign contribution limits through these instruments in Howard County. So, tracking these LLCs is a very tedious task, and it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole. Every election year, they come up with these new LLCs, and it's very difficult. So we really urge you to issue a favorable report on this, because this is critical to increasing accountability in county government, which is sorely needed. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Fred Tutman. Welcome back to the committee. Fred, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My testimony is in favor of this bill. I'm Fred Tutman, a 20-year veteran of the waterkeeper movement in the Chesapeake Bay. I've spent over 20 years testifying on zoning and land use matters related in each of the 7 counties, Patuxent. The odds are usually against our cause, I'll admit, in this work, and consequently I've been slap-sued, punched in the nose, been in a couple of bar fights, and demonized by our adversaries over the years in my service as a riverkeeper. But sometimes I feel this work is like shadow boxing, because we don't truly know who the opposition is. how they're wired into the decision-making process. There can't really be a level playing field where the identity of the players on that field have been concealed. It assures that the long arm of real estate influence remains present but invisible. It corrupts, destroys public confidence in those processes, as well as in the veracity and honesty of the proceedings. A former governor, who I won't mention by name here, has been called out for using 80-plus separate LLCs during the course of his term of office to camouflage the extent and the reality of his real estate conflicts of interest in areas where he had substantial political influence. According to several reliable informants, this reality was responsible for my removal from the State River Commission last year. Many of you know this because many of you actually voted to restore me to that commission, for which, by the way, I deeply appreciate. But the problem is real. When we argue in front of planning boards and adjudicating bodies about land use matters, it's vital for all sorts of reasons that there be honesty and veracity in those proceedings and that those ideas be upheld. Those ideals need to be protected. It can't happen without transparency, and transparency is all this very short and sweet bill calls for. In spite of claims that somehow invades somebody's privacy or discriminates in some fashion against those who have gamed the system in the past in order to obtain subsidies and advantages by proxy behind a veil of secrecy, and while evading the intent of the ethics rules by concealing their conflicts. So it's hard to see who's harmed by transparency, but easy to see how it can result in a more fair and open process that helps level that playing field. I certainly hope you'll advance this legislation to its passage.
Thank you very much. Next, let's welcome back to the House of Delegates former Delegate Virginia Thomas. Ginny, great to see you.
Great to see you, Mr. Chairman. Whoops, I'm using my time right now, sorry. I am supporting this legislation because I believe that the public has a right to know who are the investors of an entity that will be receiving public benefits. We need to be able to research past practices of this entity to see if they did or did not comply with the government regulations attached to the benefit. For example, in Howard County, we had someone apply for getting into the water and sewer district for 1,200 plus units plus 280 healthcare units, so 12,000 units. They got into the water and sewer district in a rural area. They got increased density. And every time I asked at the hearing who are the investors, I was told it was none of my business and that I shouldn't be asking that question. They also got the benefit of MIHU's subsidized benefits. They got problems, could be for our hospital emergency room, increased traffic on 108, et cetera. And also this is supposed to be a CCRC. What if they build it and the state decides there's either no need or only partial need? Then we will have allowed investors that we don't even know who they are to come in, get extensive benefits and not be able to deliver the product. So they will go to the county council and the county and the zoning board and say, now you have to allow apartments, which would or would not be allowed in that rural district normally. So there's tremendous benefits here, and I don't understand why we were not allowed to know who the owners or the investors are so that we could do some research on how dependable or truthful they've been in the past. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good seeing you again.
It's good to see you. Before I go on to Liz Bobo, you were a member of the Environmental Matters Committee, weren't you?
I was vice chair when I was 12 years there, vice chair of environmental matters when it was also healthcare.
Yeah.
And for the fun of it, for the rural guys, hunting and fishing, which I love too.
We still have that. We still have that.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just curious, who was the chairman that you served with?
Ron Guns.
Okay, Ronnie, okay. All
Ronnie,
right.
Eastern Shore.
Okay, yep. All right, well, listen, I'm going to have to go to Liz Bobo's. It's always great seeing you, though.
Thank you so
Liz,
much.
are you there?
I'm here.
All right.
Here.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Well, I wonder why you can't see me. Can you see me now?
No, I can't.
Moment, honey. Well, I'm clicking on a start video, but it's not starting video.
Well,
Maybe we can do
you know
it
what, Liz,
without
we can
video,
hear you.
right? Okay, that's good. I could tell Ginny that she pretty much gave my testimony for me, and I thought it was great testimony, I will say. And I will tell you the background that she and I have in land use planning. The new town of Columbia, founded by Jim Rouse, I think is nationally, if not internationally known for good land use planning. And my husband, Lloyd Knowles, and Ginny Thomas were two of the first members of the county council, which also served as the zoning board in Howard County. So they have she has very good credentials. And I hope that I came along a little bit later, first served on the Board of Appeals, then on the county council, and then was the first woman county executive elected in the state of Maryland. And many of public policy issues were priorities for me: human rights, social justice, the arts. But my heart was mainly with environmental issues. Maryland is a state where it's particularly important. We have the Patapsco River and the Patuxent River and the Chesapeake Bay. So what we do here environmentally has broad impact. And I don't at all believe that developers are bad people. I mean, there are many good developers who are watching out for the environment as they do their work. Jim Rouse, who founded Columbia, was renowned and who I knew well personally, as did Ginny and my husband, was a remarkable developer. But why not pass this bill? Because what could possibly be a good reason for keeping the names of people unavailable to the public? What could possibly come as a benefit from that? I think the answer is nothing. So we should not be messing around with this. We should not change the law. And I really appreciate very much that it has been introduced.
Thank you very much, Liz. Just, we sat next to each other on environmental matters when Maggie was the chair, didn't we?
Yeah, could I forget that, Kumar? Of course not.
I'll tell you what, and so you
next to quiet Kumar Barve.
You got to hear my mini tirades against the HOA advocates, and I felt it was an example of fascism in modern America. Anyway, it's great hearing your voice, Liz. I'm going to go to Rebecca Snyder, who's here with us, and then we will go to questions. Rebecca, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Rebecca Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Press Association. And honestly, the people who came before me did a fantastic job summarizing and with specificity the issues before us. The Press Association obviously stands for transparency. It's a central part of our core mission, and as reporters and journalists. And the stakes are high when you're dealing with real estate. Real estate is not a renewable resource. There's only, but so much land in Maryland. And the public deserves to know what's happening and the disposition when development happens. And so this is a simple bill. It's not onerous. It's a 10%, if an entity owns more than 10%, they need to be disclosed. And that allows not only public officials, but the public to be able to make objective decisions so that they can understand what they're getting into, know the pieces of the puzzle, follow the money, and make the appropriate decisions for their communities. So we urge a favorable report and thank Delegate Wu for bringing the legislation.
All right, we've got a question, at least one question. Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Wu, thanks for this bill. Welcome to ENT. So my question, I just wanted to first give you an opportunity to respond to some of the opposition testimony. I mean, they're gonna come up and say that this is gonna deter the building of homes. Is that one of the goals of the bill, to sort of discourage housing development?
No, not at all. Okay. Right? There's no way we're doing that. We were really trying to say, be transparent, be accountable for this, because when zoning board come to discuss whether they approve or not, right? They have so much information. At the same time, whenever there's development, there are probably some parties say that's not a good development, that's not a good location, right? But they don't know who is behind those applications and what's their real motive. Because in general cases, they will say, we're coming here to develop something for public good. But in reality, it's a business decision, right? They need to make money, right? So we're not trying to deter their development. We just make sure the public and the decision maker has the right information in front of them.
Okay, and that's good. You know, my understanding of zoning decisions was always that the decision should be basically made based on the four corners of the application. And I think it actually, in Maryland law, I think there may be some judicial precedent that the ownership should not be part of the zoning decision. So by making this public, are you concerned that county councils, and anyone on the panel, I mean, obviously we have a lot of government experience on the virtual panel, anyone can answer this, but is there a concern that maybe the decision-making bodies, the county councils, the city councils, or whatever, might misuse this information and instead start making zoning decisions based on the identity of the applicant rather than on the four corners, the merits of the application itself?
I don't think that will be a concern. It's better to know them publicly than know them secretly, right? I think there's so many ways they can find out who are the owners from the zoning board. But it's really for the general public, there's no way when they argue in front of the zoning board say that may be a good decision, that may be a bad decision. But for them to dig out who are the real applicants behind those big monies, right? It's very challenging for them to figure it out. That's the intention for this bill.
Yeah, I just worry about a scenario, and just, if you could just tell me why I shouldn't worry about this. I just worry about a scenario where this bill would make it easier for a county council member, for example, to say, oh, Johnny's a 12% owner on this deal. Johnny and I used to grill out together. You know, oh, Betty is a 13% owner. She's in my fantasy football league with me. And even if they don't explicitly try to help out their buddies, I feel like subjectively or unconsciously, it may cloud their view of the project to know that Johnny or Betty, who I like, are doing this one. Or what if Dave is a 15% owner on a project and one of the county council members knows that Dave is a supporter of Donald Trump or Dave is a supporter of Bernie Sanders? How can we make sure that those types of decisions don't cloud the judgment even unconsciously of these decision makers?
I think that's a great question, right? So, because zoning board members, they have their own experience, or maybe their perspective in terms of how they really make decisions, because so many factors, and especially when the board try to approve waivers or exemptions, and sometimes I think the public are really frustrated by, they see they shouldn't grant that waiver, or they shouldn't grant that exemption. But the exemption approved, the waiver approved, right? So it's really challenging to make assumptions how they will react in that assumptions. But personally, based on my experience of interaction with many other people, the better they disclose their background, the better for the public to know. And then put the zoning board under check as well. If they know there's a close association, they probably should excuse themselves. Right, for example.
Okay, thank you.
I think Mr. Hodgu wants to answer the question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just if I may, there were a couple of questions I wanted to maybe answer. One is, and this is based on my experience, existing zoning laws have some basic reporting requirements where a petitioner is required to disclose their contributions. I think that the challenge is that, as you know, as shared by Delegate Wu, there are several LLCs that are created where the potential beneficiaries are not disclosing themselves, and so there's already if we were to take that the question of people providing disclosure to its and concerns around that to its logical conclusion, then we would not be requiring any sort of disclosure requirements. But we do right now have disclosure requirements, but it's not it's not complete. It's very basic, and I think providing this disclosure requirement would ensure that there's transparency around around people who seek to benefit from this, and and so I think there will be more good from this than any potential adverse impacts, because quite frankly, a lot of these LLCs that are created, if the goal is to, if the beneficiary is providing, through they have their main business entity where they're providing, they're giving campaign contributions, they're reporting that, then why create these multiple LLCs and provide campaign contributions through that? Why not just, so clearly there's sort of like an attempt to skirt those requirements, and the public will benefit greatly from making sure that those. I think there's not an attempt to skirt that. Thank you.
Next question goes to Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Wu, for this bill. Isn't it true that the zoning board, the members of the zoning board, usually know who is behind a petition, and that this is really about making sure the public has that same information?
So it depends, right? So because there's so many layers in terms of one applicant. If one LLC, the other LLC applied for that LLC, right? So there can be chain of ownership. So that's the reason we want to say, okay, who exactly behind that?
Right, and then the other thing is, isn't it true that the zoning board initially makes a decision on whether there's been a change or mistake before they put in a new zoning category? But then there's discretionary decisions, like how many parameters, how much control needs to be put over this particular applicant. And that can be based on experience with that
Exactly.
applicant.
That can be not really objective, more subjective.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, thank you. I just have one question. How would this bill apply to a REIT, where sometimes you may have thousands of owners in the company, and who, as shareholders, they can change, right? They could change by the day, sometimes by the hour or by the minute. How does this bill apply to a company like that?
You can see there's 10% threshold there.
Okay.
So
But I
if
mean,
you have
still,
1,000
sometimes that could still, like 10% of a company could still be a lot depending upon the size of the REIT that we're talking about. There's some very large ones that 10% could still be a significant number.
I think that being removed from our amendment.
Okay, thank you.
We definitely don't want to deal with that situation.
Sure, okay.
Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, thank you for bringing this bill. In your amendments, do you define affiliated entity in the bill or any amendments? Just wondering how, would it be 25% common ownership or, certain threshold?
Yes, so in terms of that threshold, we think about it, what's the right threshold, right? And we just look some documents and choose the 10%. But that number can be adjusted based on if anybody have amendment, feel other number is better. This is our first initial to really bring this to the light for the legislation, right? We don't have any precedent say what's the number should be there. So we said 10%.
Okay, thank you.
There appear to be no further questions for the supporters of the bill. Thank you very much. Let's turn to the opponents. Robert Enton, Lori Graff, Tom Ballantyne.
Should I stay here or?
No.
Okay, thank you very much for so many questions. I'm surprised.
Yeah. Bob, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association. With me is Lori Graff, the CEO, and to my left is Tom Ballantyne from NAIOP, and we're very strongly opposed to this bill. I think, in my 40 years of coming down here, this seems to me to be totally unprecedented, that because you are making an application to a governmental entity, that you must disclose everyone who has any interest in your business. Typically, an application is signed by a CEO Maybe if it's an LLC, it's signed by, one of the members. And I haven't seen the